work. My last one, it was not, the volume was not working in my last classroom. It was not picking up, the noise canceling mic was apparently inoperable or something. I'm not sure what was going on. So let me see if it's working in here. Seems like it's working in this classroom. I may have to move our principles of marketing class. All right. So what is justice and what does justice have to do with marketing? So let's start with the first question. We won't do double-barreled questions. What is justice? What do you think justice is? Unfortunately, you had to listen to this. It will diverge. There will be some divergence in the class, but at the beginning we have the same sort of topics. So, what is justice?
I think it's supposed to be a sense of doing or making something right or doing something right. I don't know.
Okay, so justice is doing something right. That's what Socrates means it as. It's not, when we think about justice, we have, for example, in the United States, something called the Department of Justice. And what does the Department of Justice do? It prosecutes people for federal crimes, mostly. They do other things as well. They also represent various agencies in court, in the Supreme Court, for example. When laws are challenged, they go to the Supreme Court and look at that. So when we think about justice, that's a very limited sense for the ancients. When they use the word justice, or the Greek word that we interpret as being justice, they really mean ethics and morality. So when we talk about justice in marketing, we're talking about morality and ethics. So what is, and when we say just, what makes something a good decision from an ethical standpoint as a marketer? We can think about all kinds of business decisions. What we do as marketers is we focus on the idea of exchange in marketing, right? Let's try this question. Is marketing an art or a science? You think it's both? Why do you think it's both?
I think the science of knowing who you need to market to, because you've got to break down and know your client. And then the art of it is doing something that is appealing to those individuals that you've already kind of predisposed to say, these are the people that I am going to market to.
Okay, so marketing as a science figures out what consumers want. It is a science, that's correct. We can figure out with a great deal of precision what consumers want, and then trying to figure out how to get them to buy our version of what it is that they want or need is, you would say, an art. Coming up with that persuasion is an art. And it's becoming easier in an era of AI to do this. How many of you saw Coca-Cola's AI-generated Christmas ads this year? How many of you saw those on TV? Like, I find this interesting because my students don't generally watch TV anymore. Like, it's only people older than me that watch TV, because why would you watch TV? You've got all of these other things that you could do with your time besides watch TV. And by God, you can time shift, you can zip and zap if you are watching TV. So you're not watching the ads because that's boring. But they're like really pretty good. These AI generated ads. I asked, I think I told you last time, ChatGPT to come up with movie posters based on my nephew's and mine's adventures. So I take pictures of he and I and run them through ChatGPT and say, come up with a movie poster and, you know, generate it just to see what it comes up with. And it's really pretty entertaining to see what it comes up with really quickly. How many of you have used these AI devices? What's your favorite AI device? Yeah.
One of the ones I love is the Notebook LM on Google, because you can put in a like PDF document and then it'll make a podcast, like a 15 or 20-minute podcast that you can listen to it instead of reading like 50 different pages. So that's
Really?
nice.
Wow. Okay. So it summarizes the material for you so that you're no longer having to distill 50 to 75 pages yourself. Is that better than reading it?
It's quicker.
It's quicker. It's maybe more efficient. For the first time in history, this is a big deal, and it's a huge topic in marketing ethics. The fact that, historically speaking, technological advances have eliminated manual labor jobs. That's what's been eliminated in the past. In the future, AI potentially has the possibility of eliminating our jobs, white collar jobs. Historically, the reason people went to college was because you didn't want to do manual labor, but it's going to be really hard. I mean, one of the things that, you know, you should think about is it's going to be really hard to replace the plumber using AI. But it may not be so hard to replace the ad creative at an advertising agency with AI. Literally, the posters that ChatGPT has come up with for mine and my nephew's adventures they're highly appealing. They're really well done, and it did it in a matter of minutes. Something that would have taken a creative person, you know, a month to develop a storyboard and sketch out and things like that can now be done in a matter of minutes. And if you ask it to do something that's not sort of graphically intense, it can do that even faster. So, for example, I asked ChatGPT to come up with, I'm a lawyer, to come up with a marketing plan for a law firm, just out of curiosity, you know, in Oklahoma City. If I'm going to start a law firm and I'm going to target, you know, individuals who are looking for wills, trusts, and estates that have a net worth of between $3 and $5 million. And it spit that out in 30 seconds. Took longer on the movie posters. Spit out a marketing plan in 30 seconds. It's pretty incredible. It's one of the reasons why I want next week for you guys to look at AI and see, because I think when we think about deep things like this concept of justice, that it's going to come up with one of the things I can tell when people are using AI, when they're submitting something to me that is AI, which I want you to learn how to use AI effectively, is that it's really well written, but right now it's pretty shallow. The responses I get are not at all substantive, but it's getting better all the time. Well written, pretty sentences, good punctuation. That's one of the ways I know. Because business students on things like the essays, on the exams in here are horrible writers, by and large, on the whole. Because you've learned how to do everything in PowerPoint for most of your classes. And what I want is narrative. And so I read these, and it's very clear to me that the writing skills of business students lacks compared to the writing skills of liberal arts students. Which is sort of makes sense because that's what they do over there. That's the creator, right? You know, like in business, we're not generally writing long narratives. We're trying to distill information down into very succinct sound bites or bullet points that we can get across to our customers and constituents. So going back to this idea of justice then, and it's really what we're talking about is ethics. What do you think is just? What do you want? Let's think of specific situations that apply to you. You're enrolled in a marketing ethics course on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11 to 12:15 at the University of Central Oklahoma. What is it that you want in terms of treatment from your service provider, and that's what I am, me, with regard to this class? Let's think about that.
Equal opportunity.
You want equal opportunity. I like the fact that you said equal opportunity. Why do you say equal opportunity?
I feel like just like a space like a classroom, it just if you're treating other students or specific students better than others, then I feel like
Okay.
you're failing as a teacher.
All right, so I like the fact that you add opportunity to it because students inevitably, you're the first one who's ever said that, who's ever put it together, equal opportunity. A lot of students will say, I want equality. Well, equality can mean equality of results. And I'm going to tell you, you're not going to be happy with the equality of results if I give everybody Fs in here, right? That's treating you all equally. I am being absolutely equal in my treatment of you if I give everybody an F. You're not going to be happy with that. Now, if I did the other extreme and I gave everybody an A, would all of you be happy? If I said, really? You'd be happy with that.
Give everybody an A?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
you'd be just absolutely peachy fine with that.
perfectly fine with that,
Why?
'cause I got my A.
It wouldn't upset you that somebody else who did no work got the same grade as you?
Doesn't affect me,
Doesn't affect you.
doesn't affect my grade book.
It doesn't bother you. If you actually do the work because you think, gosh, maybe I need to know something, you know, when I come out of this class. One of the things that this class does is it builds skills that don't necessarily seem relevant at first glance, but it allows you to think critically. That's what philosophy does as an activity, is it strips everything down to the point that we think about things critically. And when you go out in the world, and by the way, the vast majority of you, your first job will be in sales. We teach professional sales in this department. We have a professional sales program, and we have a lot of trouble recruiting students into sales because they think, well, I want to get a business degree, but I don't want to sell. And 95% of you, your first job will be selling. I know all of these finance majors think that I'm going to be developing highly sophisticated financial models. Well, who are you doing it for? You know, it's not just to develop the model, it's so that you can sell your knowledge to people that are going to pay you to, so it's selling. 95% of the jobs are in sales. And by the way, personal selling is maybe one of the things that we won't be able to replace with AI. Because ultimately it's about making a connection with people. Although I don't know that you all want a connection so much anymore. It's amazing to me, like, I have this nephew, and he's really sort of unusual, but like, he and his friends never go over to each other's houses. Don't have to. Because all of the games and things like that that they want to play, they play online. They play all of the, they play against each other. Call of Duty, whatever it is, and I can't keep up. Like he got really, when he was really little, he was like, I don't know, 5 or 6. He was really into Fortnite. And so I was like, well, let's play Fortnite. He's like, oh, Grant, that was last week. I've moved on to God of War. How many of you played God of War? You played God of War? Do you like that game?
Yeah.
I was like, the character in it like keeps calling the other character Roy, and I'm like, why is he calling him Roy? Why, like that? And he's like, he's saying boy. I'm like, oh, that's really bad. Audio. It's gotten better, I guess. I'm told. Although I still have to scream. I have Meta glasses. I fly competitive aerobatics. And so I have these Meta glasses so that I can video when I'm going upside down and doing loops and things like that in the airplane. And I have to like scream at them for it to, I don't think I am that difficult to understand, but I have to scream at the glasses to get it to understand me for some reason. And I'm in the car and I have to scream at Siri to get her to understand where it is that I want to go. Hey Siri, I want to go home. You want to go to Homeland? No. Home. Taking you to Homeland. 538 Northwest 34th Street. No. Is that right? No. Home. So I'm screaming at this AI. It would distress my mother. She's like, you're being so rude to it. And I'm like, it's not alive. So they don't want to get together and hang out. They hang out and play video games online. And when we think about things like that, should we offer these products? I mean, one of the things that we are doing in creating these kinds of products that people want that are maybe highly addictive, if you play these games, you become like really intense in these games. Is we have now developed into a society where we're alone together. We are experiencing higher and higher levels of isolation as a result of the fact that everything is sort of, off and distant. It's led to issues in civility. It's really easy to criticize and flame people online, isn't it? That you don't have to see. So you want fairness in this class, and it's because it's a live face-to-face class, you want me to treat you the same as I treat everybody else, or give you the equal opportunity, right? You want equality of opportunity as opposed to equality of results. And I would suggest to you that most people, if they thought, I remember when I was an undergraduate student and I wanted to go to law school, so I was really concerned about my grades. And I was like, I had a 4.0. I graduated summa cum laude. And I can remember getting really upset going down. They used to post grades on the doors of the buildings by social security number. That's safe. Right, that's how they used to post our grades, by social security. And so you could figure out, if you knew who was in the class, you could figure out what other people made, because you could go down, where they were in the list and figure it out. And I'll never forget, I worked really hard in this one class, and I looked at all the grades they were posted. Everybody had an A in the class. I was so angry. I'm like, what's up with this? I wrote this brilliant paper, and I knew other people didn't because I saw their papers. We used to not have D2L. You'd have to actually bring in a hard copy of your paper and turn it in to a professor. And here's my 30-page paper, and the chump next to me is submitting 5 pages. What's up with that? So you don't want equality of results, you want equality of opportunity. So that's maybe part of our concept of justice, right? Is that we want to be treated fairly. Now, when people say that, what is fair? We have lots of sayings in life, like life's not fair. Is it? No, it's not. Is it fair that, the Kennedys were born millionaires and I have to come down here and teach you all in order to, be able to afford my airplane? No, not fair. Maybe we should equalize that. So what's fair? When people say, I want to be treated fairly, what does that mean? Well, again, we can go back to the equality of results, equality of opportunity. How do we determine that? How do we think about these things? And how do we think about them really critically? Well, as I suggested last time, these 3 questions that we focus on at the beginning of this class, and then we will combine the ethical theory with marketing theory. And at the intersection of that, what we hope is we come up with decisions that are ethical in a marketing context. So we're going to apply abstract theory to then marketing theory and come up with concrete situations in which we try to determine what is the most ethical outcome that we can have. And this is really, really hard in business, because if we ask really tough questions about things, it turns out that we have a lot of different answers, right? And that's one of the things that Socrates focuses in on in the first fully worked out system of philosophy that we know of, which is Republic. Now, maybe there is somebody who worked out the answers to these 3 questions, the question of knowledge, conduct, and governance before Socrates, but we don't know about them. And it's kind of interesting that we know about Socrates. Why is that? Well, because Socrates, who is maybe one of the greatest minds of the Western intellectual tradition, would never be able to get tenure at a place like UCL, because he didn't write anything down. He just wandered around Athens and asked these interesting questions like, what's justice? And that's where we get Republic. So how do we know about Socrates' ideas in Republic? Well, we know about him from 2 sources. His friend, the poet Xenophon, and his most famous student, Plato. So in Republic, Socrates is, at a party, and there are various people, and he's talking to an old man at the party, and the guy says, well, it's good to be old and wealthy because you have time to think about things and really, consider what it is that is the meaning of life and all of this other stuff. And Socrates says, okay, so what is that? What is the meaning of life? And this turns to the question of what is justice? What is the ultimate good in society? And a number of interlocutors provide different explanations. So what is justice? One of the things that they come up with is, well, justice is the will of the stronger. Justice is what I say it is in this classroom because I have power. What's that power? It's the power to determine your grade. if I engaged in equality of results and I said I was gonna give everybody A's, I don't think any of you would work terribly hard at it, right? I mean, like, you might, if I just said, well, everybody will get an A, would you even show up for class? Probably not. Thomas Jefferson founded the first secular institution of higher education in the world. Anybody know what that is?
Harvard.
Huh?
Harvard.
No, Harvard is not a secular institution of higher education. What do I mean by secular?
Not associated with the church.
Not associated with the church. There you go. Harvard is a church affiliated. Harvard has a school of theology, for example. So Thomas Jefferson founds the first secular institution of higher education. So historically speaking, the way we got universities was they were formed out of the need to transfer knowledge about the first academic discipline, which was theology, to make priests, right? They were products of the Catholic Church needing to transfer knowledge, learned knowledge, to this body of people who were going to tell everybody else about the good book. And that was the priest. And so the original Bibles were written in what? Depends on which books you're looking at, but they were written in Hebrew or Aramaic, and then later Latin. And so Latin became the language of the church. And forever and ever and ever until Vatican II, the Mass was said in Latin. So universities were these places where we developed knowledge for the clergy. And then the other learned professions came along. Law was the second, and then medicine. So historically, universities grew out of the need to train clergy, and then I'm oversimplifying a lot of history here, and then the need to train lawyers in the law, and then the need to train physicians. That's the third of the oldest three learned professions. So theology, law, and then medicine. So Thomas Jefferson founds this university called the University of Virginia, and he doesn't want it to be an institution. His idea is that he'll hire academics from across the known world who represent the best of their disciplines, and you will come and you will listen to the lectures and you will leave when you feel educated. He didn't want it to be a degree granting institution. So how many of you would do that? How many of you would come here and listen to my lectures and get nothing for it? Anybody? Any takers on that? No. Why? Why is it that you're sitting here listening to me lecture? And this is the part of the course that I love the most because I get to talk about stuff. I didn't start out as a marketing professor. I started out as a classical letters major in the College of Liberal Arts, right? So I had a lot of philosophy classes. And this is the stuff that I really love to think about and students really hate. So why is it that you're sitting here and you're letting me, inflict knowledge on you that you really don't want and you might not find terribly useful? Well, it's because you want a piece of paper at the end of this experience. From this specific class, you want a grade. And that grade, a passing grade in this class is a D, but you need more than that if you're going to graduate. So you probably need at least a C. And in the business core, is it even a C? I think you have to get in the business core, don't you have to get a B or better in those classes in order to have it count?
I think it is a C.
It's a C or better? I thought it was a B or better. Maybe we've gotten lax in our standards. I'm almost certain at one point in time, we said that it was a B or better, which was a real struggle for some people, particularly when we considered business calculus to be part of the core. So B or better. Now it's a C or better. Wow. Letting those standards lapse, aren't we? So you want a grade in this class that will contribute to 3 credit hours towards a degree that when you get it, will say, I am educated. I have these skills, and you should hire me for a job because I went to the University of Central Oklahoma and I endured all of these people, inflicting knowledge on me for 4 years or whatever it is. Most people don't graduate in 4 years anymore. Why is that?
Change their major.
Well, that's one reason. A lot of people do change their major. You think you get here and you think you want to do one thing. People are like, oh, I want to be an engineer. Well, that's really hard. It involves a lot of math. And so they decide, well, they can't do engineering, so they'll do something else. But a lot of it is just the fact that when I went to college, my parents could afford to pay for me to go to college, and I didn't have to work. How many of you have jobs and have to work to pay for this experience? I suggest that that's one of the reasons why college has become so much more expensive and students have to work in order to not come out of this experience with a mountain of debt, right? So Jefferson didn't want anybody to get a degree. He just wanted you to come and experience this and leave when you felt educated. I would suggest to you that most of you won't do that. So within that framework, what is it that we should offer? What is just? From a marketing standpoint, given the fact that I am a service provider, should we require this class? We used to require this class for a degree in marketing, and then they decided, we go through these periods of time where my colleagues decide that our students really need to focus in on things like social media or focus in on how to use AI, which is why I'm incorporating AI into the curriculum in this class and asking you to do this assignment next week in your groups, where you look at AI's versions of justice. And we'll see between today and then in week 4, what it is that the theorists of the past have come up with in terms of what is justice. So I'm a service provider. Should we require as part of the service that you have to have some experience in ethics? Well, the reason that we have gone back and forth on this class and whether or not it's required for a degree in marketing is because every time we stop offering this degree, and I don't mean this just as we, I mean as a collective group, as academics say, well, our students really need to learn about this new thing that's popped up called AI, and they really need to know how to use this. Big data is a part of this, right? Understanding marketing analytics may be more important than understanding marketing ethics. And so we go through these battles in academia where we start saying, well, we're not going to offer specific courses in ethics. And then something will happen in society, like somebody will use big data or they will use AI, and it will lead to some kind of major catastrophe. One of the ways that they used big data in the past that led to a major catastrophe was called the subprime mortgage crisis. They came up with these in finance, these models in finance, where they bundled together really bad loans and sold them as AAA securities. How did they do that? And why did this happen? And what ended up happening was it collapsed the entire financial sector to the point that people were, there were huge foreclosures on homes. Because what they were doing was they were bundling really bad mortgages together. And they said, well, if we bundle enough of them, statistically, based on formulas that we develop and analyses of these assets, enough people will pay. And that works as long as people in the economy is chugging along. But what happens when the economy tanks and people stop paying? Now, it's true that they'll give up a lot in order to continue to pay their mortgage, because generally speaking, you have to have some place to live. And so you'll start sacrificing a lot of other areas. and still pay for your mortgage. But ultimately, it became a house of cards. In fact, CNBC did a whole special on this called House of Cards, where they document how they bundled all of these really smart people using big data sets, bundled all this stuff together and sold these, and they sold it not just to other people, but to governments. It impacted, for example, the government of Norway in a huge way, because the government of Norway bought all of these securities to help finance their needs, because they have a big problem in places like Norway and Sweden. And what is that? Well, they've got an aging population like we do in the United States, and their population is not having kids. Again, when I was a kid growing up, I think I mentioned this last time, when I was a kid growing up, I didn't know anybody who just had one other sibling in my class. Now, I went to a Catholic school, so that may have been part of it, right? I went to a Roman Catholic school, but most of the people that I went to school with, I was pretty unusual in that I had one sibling. There were two of us. Most people I knew had more than that. They had 3 or 4. How many kids are you all having statistically?
None less.
Yeah, considerably less. Why? They're expensive. Children used to be an economic asset. You needed them when everybody was working on the farm. I used to ask my students, and I still do, how many of you grew up, since we're in Oklahoma and a big portion of our economy is agricultural, how many of you grew up on a farm? And inevitably, a large percentage of people that I had in class throughout the course of my history of teaching here grew up on farms. Almost nobody does today. Anybody in here have grandparents?
My grandparents have land in Wichita, but it's not a farm. They just have cattle and a barn, so.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of rural. Like you had, like, you could identify a cow, right? I have students that can't identify a cow, probably. You know? Or couldn't identify various types of cattle. Like Angus versus, Brahma, things like that. So kids at that point in time were an economic asset. We have remnants of this today in that we have summer vacation for school children. It wasn't really vacation in the past. What it was you needed kids to go out and plant and work the fields and then harvest. And that's when you went back to school, was when the harvest was out. That's why historically we went back to school in most places after Labor Day, because that's when you would have done the harvesting and you'd go back to school. So Socrates asked this question, what is justice? And one of the interlocutors says, well, it's might makes right. It's the will of the stronger. It's me telling you guys that you're going to use AI and you're going to look at these things and analyze the responses that it comes up with and tell me what's wrong with these responses in thinking about them after we talk about Socrates and Aristotle and all of this stuff. And then we talk about John Stuart Mill and Immanuel Kant. And we're gonna see whether or not AI can come up with something that's legitimate in its analysis, right? So you're gonna do that because I tell you to, and I have some power, which is the power of the grade book, which is something that you want because you want the grade that says you got 3 credit hours, and ultimately you bundle all of those grades together. You get this bachelor's of business administration, and you use that to go out and get yourself a better job than you would have otherwise, right? So, but Socrates says, no, that can't be right, because if we accept that it's the will of the stronger, well, you could have really extreme examples of people doing horrific things, and nobody would say that's just or moral. It's just the way it is. And the interlocutor, which is, I think, this Thrasymachus, says, yes, but that's the way the world works. And Socrates' response to that is, you don't need a philosopher to tell you the way the world is working. You need a philosopher to tell you what's the best that we can become. So another interlocutor comes up with what's called the deserts theory, which is what most of you would want in terms of my assessing you fairly. You want me to give you the grade that you earn. So give you your just deserts theory of justice. If you put forth the effort and you complete the assignments in this class and you do the work, you want to earn your A or your B or your gentleman C. My ex-wife used to say, and she thought C's were great. C's get degrees. And I was horrified because I was a college professor. I was horrified by this attitude that C's get degrees. What? No. Wrong. However, I had to admit when she would tell me, she's like, has anybody ever asked you to see your transcript? And I'm like, she's like, did that summa cum laude get you anything other than a nice stole at graduation? And at the time I'd have to say, no, nobody ever asked for my transcript for a job after I got the degree. Nobody ever asked to see my law degree, my law school transcript when they hired me to be a lawyer. And I said that for years and years and years and years. And then I found out that because we have the ability to analyze big data sets like this now, and we have the ability to gather this information, and I teach professional selling, one of the companies that we use as one of our major sponsors for sales competitions and stuff like that is Paycom, and they actually do ask you for your transcript, and they have figured it out based on the performance evaluations of their top selling salespeople that they won't hire anybody who has less than a 3.75. Because they figured out that people who have a 3.75 or better produce more. It's the 80-20 rule. The Pareto principle. You all know what the 80-20 rule is? What is it?
It's the same as like you produce 80 and the other 20 is something that you can be more flexible.
So what it is they say that 20% of your workforce will produce 80% of your output, and vice versa. 80% will. In other words, you have a small percentage of people that are actually doing most of the work, and they figured this out. That they could change that number of the 80-20 rule by analyzing your undergraduate grade point average, and those that had 3.75 were more likely to have higher levels of sales productivity. So I used to say it didn't matter, like it doesn't matter what your GPA is, but now people are actually looking at that. They're actually asking for your transcripts. Any of you want to go back and maybe rethink whether or not C's get degrees based on that in a world in which we can do this? So you want to get your just desserts. Well, Socrates says the problem with this is we got to come up with an absolute concept of justice. And is there ever a time in which you could think about the fact that giving somebody what they deserve is not necessarily just? And the interlocutors are having a hard time coming up with something. So he gives them an example. Again, I'll use an example from my own life. When I grew up in Oklahoma and New Mexico, northern New Mexico and Oklahoma, out of the country, almost everybody I knew was a hunter. That's just something that was very typical. You wouldn't find this today. In my high school parking lot when I was a kid, lots of guys that I went to high school with had gun racks in their pickup truck. And it was not unusual for them to go out hunting before class, particularly during waterfowl season. You generally go out. So is anybody in here a hunter? No. One person. When I used to ask that question, all of the hands would go up. I was surprised in my morning class when I asked this question, how many people were hunters? we had, I don't know, what, 6 or 7 or 8? That's a really high number of people anymore. It's incredible to me how few people actually have engaged in this. So these people would go out and hunt. You know, let's suppose that I'm a hunter and you loan me a gun to go out and try. You say, this is just the greatest thing since sliced bread. You'll just love it. You go out, and then a couple days later, you come to collect your gun, and it's obvious to me that you have smoked the marijuana because it's legal in Oklahoma now, right? Not legal federally. And you're upset and you're talking about shooting Professor so-and-so with your gun that you now want back. Should I give you the gun back? It's yours. You own it. That's giving you what you own. That's your desserts. Should I give it back to you? Anybody want to say that I should give it back? Nobody wants to say I should give, yeah. So Socrates says this can't be the absolute concept of justice. This idea of desserts can't be the absolute concept. What we want is we want the absolute idea of justice. What is absolutely the most just outcome that we could possibly have? So he goes and he picks through a few more of their ideas, and they finally said, you know, like, stop teasing us. You tell us, you all you do is you ask questions and tell us what you think. And he says, well, maybe if we are thinking about this as an individual, it's hard to see. Sometimes if you're looking at something that's really small, like an individual unit, it's hard to determine what's going on with that individual unit. But if we look at a bigger model of that unit, we can ascertain what is justice. So he says, let's think about a community, a polis. A polis is just the individual on a bigger scale, right? Because it's made up of all of these individuals. And so it's just the individual on a bigger scale. So what we'll do is if we look at the bigger whole and we can determine what's just for that whole, perhaps we can apply that to the individual and come up with an idea of justice, this absolute concept of justice. So in this book, Republic, and this is where he answers the question of knowledge, right? So there are 3 questions that we're gonna focus on: knowledge, conduct, governance. And with regard to the question of knowledge, this is where he focuses in on that. And it's called The Allegory of the Cave. And it's one of the best worked allegories in all of literature. And you should read it for yourself, because I'm not sure that I can do justice. And I will tell you that when I was your age, well, actually I started reading this when I was younger than you, because I was a political science major, or I was actually a classical letters major. And so the first time I had to deal with Republic was in some philosophy, ancient philosophy course. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, God, this is the stupidest thing in the planet. But then I started to think about it afterwards. It had to set in, and it really is pretty brilliant. So what Socrates says is, let's suppose that we have a group of people, a society of people that are all born and raised in a cave. Let's think of this classroom as being our cave, right? You all are facing the same direction. You're facing this wall and looking at, well, we're looking at the screen of me lecturing. Let's flip that over there. That way we're not just watching me walk around on screen. We're all looking at the screen. Now, I post a lot of stuff on the screen, PowerPoints and things like that you all will take notes about and download and look at. And, you know, you get this information. Well, let's suppose that in this cave, there's a large fire behind these people, and all they can see is this wall in front of them, and people behind them are controlling them by basically walking back and forth in front of this fire and projecting images up onto that wall that they're all facing. And for them, what they think of as being reality is these shadows on the wall. It's what I'm projecting on the screen. That becomes your reality. Now, let's suppose that one of these individuals is forced to turn around and face the fire. Well, they're probably going to be, and this is where sayings like blinded by the light come about. They're probably going to be somewhat blinded by this fire because all they've seen is shadows. And now they see that there's this brighter light. But when their eyes adjust, they're going to realize that everything that they thought was real before is an illusion. It's not reality. And let's suppose that you drag that individual further up and out of the cave and into the sunlight. They're really going to realize that everything that they thought was real before was a lie. Socrates says that this is what most of us are like. We go through our life not really seeing reality, believing an illusion. It's what I call functional fictions. We all do this. We all engage in functional fictions that allow us to get through the day. What's one of my functional fictions? I think that I come down here and I inflict knowledge on you, and you go out and you become better people. I don't know if that's true or not. It's what allows me to believe that my life has some meaning and purpose to it. We are deceived all the time, constantly. We're deceived by our own senses all of the time. So I started flying when I was 8 years old. I had a grandfather who was a pilot, had an airplane, started teaching me how to fly. I got a CFI so that I could start booking hours. I got my student pilot certificate and solo the day I turned 16, which is the youngest you can be. So I went out and I soloed in my family's airplane at 16 on the morning of my 16th birthday. And then I got in a car with my mother and drove down to the tag agent in Edmond and failed my driver's test. And my mother said, "You can fly an airplane, but you can't drive a car?" Totally different skill set. So I failed my driver's test. I got my private pilot's license the day I turned 17, which is the youngest that you can get it. As part of that, you do a lot of training in the air, right? And you're going to experience, particularly in Oklahoma, there's lots of wind here. We have lots of windy days. The wind, our state song is Oklahoma. And part of the refrain in that state song is, Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain. And it does. We have, on average, frontal passage every 3 days in Oklahoma, right? And when you experience turbulence in a plane, which I think most of you have probably experienced at some point in your life, you've been on a commercial plane and you've experienced turbulence, particularly, when you're taking off or landing, they'll be coming in. And because of the uneven heating of the Earth's surface, you'll have these issues that you'll have, and you'll experience turbulence. The sensation is what? Is it that you're falling? Do you feel it? Do you have a sensation of falling? Anybody felt that? Like you're falling? Most of the time you're not falling. Most of the time you're being shot up by hitting a pocket of warm air. We're deceived all the time. And so Socrates says, what we need to do is there are people who can see beyond this, and we need to follow these people. From this, you get the idea of the philosopher kings. I'm going to have to let you go with that. So work on your AI stuff. Think about what we're talking about in your groups. Look at what, you might try several different AI generating tools to see what the differences is and their definitions of justice. And in a week, we'll come back and we'll talk about what you found. Yes.
Is there a prompt on detailing?
There is. It's under the assignment tab, I believe, I think. I'm pretty sure. Let me stop the video and I'll look.
Yeah, we can't.